Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening from. We know we have an audience all over the world, so thank you so much for being with us. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I'm very delighted to welcome you on behalf of myself, former Congressman Mel Levine, and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. That is our America at a Crossroads leadership team. A very special welcome back to America at a Crossroads to tonight's guest, the great Anne Applebaum, and our wonderful moderator, Madeleine Brand. While every week these days is eventful, this has been an especially eventful week, highlighted by the return of the remaining living Israeli hostages. As events unfold in the Middle East, with all the uncertainty, we thought it best to let a bit of time pass before we dedicate a full program to how this ceasefire and possible agreement will unfold and what it means for Israel, for the Palestinians, and for the region. To that end, on December 3rd, Aaron David Miller will be with us to brief us, and in early January, Dennis Ross will be with us. So stand by for the registration links for those two programs. Meanwhile, for the next 3 weeks, we have three great programs. Next week, Linda Greenhouse, the Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times journalist, who for 3 decades covered the U.S. Supreme Court. She will be with us. The week after, we have federal prosecutor turned legal commentator Joyce Vance. And the week after that, we have election scholar and democracy expert Rick Hasson. So be sure to save your Wednesdays from 5 to 6 Pacific time for these great programs. You can register for all of the programs, all of our October and November programs in the email you'll get right after the program tonight. And thank you, as always, for your financial support to America at a Crossroads. That's what keeps us being able to present these stellar programs. Now, without further ado, please welcome tonight's outstanding moderator, Madeleine Brand. Madeleine is a beloved award-winning NPR host and producer. She's a treasure in the world of broadcast journalism, and we are so fortunate to have her on our America at a Crossroads team. And you're very lucky to have her tonight as our moderator. So here's Madeleine. Thank you, Madeleine, for doing this, and thank you, Anne.
Well, thank you, Janice. And it's great to be back with you. I love doing these long, in-depth conversations. And I'm very excited to speak again with Anne Applebaum. Just a brief introduction. She's a staff writer at The Atlantic. She's also a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and the SNF Agora Institute. She is the author of 5 critically acclaimed books, including the Pulitzer Prize winning Gulag. That's about the Soviet concentration camps that held millions of prisoners, many of whom were there for just so-called political crimes. Her latest book is Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World, and it's out now in paperback. Anne divides her time between Poland, where her husband is foreign minister, and Washington, D.C. And welcome back to America at a Crossroads.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, as always.
Great to have you. Okay, so your book was first published a little over a year ago. And I'm wondering what has surprised you in the years since when you look at what's happening in the United States and in other democracies?
It's funny, I just wrote a preface to the paperback that was published a month or so ago. And I had to rethink exactly this question. And the conclusion I came to is that in the world that I described, the book is about the network of autocracies and how they work together and in financial ways and in the military ways, in coordinating narratives. Their world has changed not that much, but our world, the democratic world, has changed enormously, almost unrecognizably, actually, in this very short period of time. And in the United States, what we've seen is an American administration adopting many of the practices and behaviors of the autocratic world. I'm not going to say that our political system has changed yet because it's too early to talk about that. But starting with financial secrecy, conflicts of interest, corruption, which is very characteristic of all the autocracies that I wrote about: Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela. Going to the use of the pressure put on media and on independent institutions, on universities, on scientific research. This is also characteristic of the autocratic world. The use of institutions of justice against the president's enemies or against the enemies of the ruling party. I mean, that's also classic. in the part of the world I worked on. And also in the case of the United States, you have a shift away from the idea, and this is something that's very important actually in the world of ideas and the battle of ideas internationally. You have a shift away from the idea that the primary role of the US in the world is as the leader of a broad democratic alliance that includes European states, Asian allies of the US, and other states around the world. And that that idea that the United States was somehow the leader of the world's democracies, which has been part of our culture for a very long time. I just wrote something about it in the Atlantic this week. Was sometimes just aspirational and sometimes hypocritical. Nevertheless, it was pretty integral to our identity, to how we were seen around the world, and I think also to how Americans see themselves. And that has also shifted and changed. I'm not going to say that America is part of the autocratic network because we're still pretty far away from that again. But the behaviors that you can see in that world have been imported here. I mean, they've always been here to some extent, and now we just see them at the level of the federal government, which I don't think we've seen before. And that's a shift that affects everybody. It affects our country, it affects our allies, it affects the way we're perceived in countries that feel neutral about us, and it's also created interesting problems and opportunities for people who don't like us, for China or for Russia.
And certainly there have been periods in our history of isolationism and nativism and populism. But in our recent histories, you write in that article you referenced, there was generally an assumption that America stood for democracy and for freedom, and that was a good thing, and a good thing to promote abroad, either by the tip of a spear or by softer methods. And I want to read a quote from your article to people watching and listening. You wrote, "The most ubiquitous form of American culture nowadays is not jazz programming going out on shortwave radio across Eurasia, but the social media platforms that pump conspiracy theories, extremism, advertising, pornography, and spam into every corner of the globe." So I want you to expand a little bit on that, the sort of the media aspect of this shift in thinking about America's role in the world and what effect that's having on other democracies.
So yes, I argue in that article, and I've also written about it elsewhere, that the U.S., the way we promoted democracy since the Second World War has been a conscious part of our foreign policy. Before that, it was a de facto part of our foreign policy. I mean, even at the time of the American Revolution and just after, people were handing around copies of the Declaration of Independence in European capitals and talking about what that might mean. And there were all kinds of imitations of the Declaration that were done soon afterwards in other countries. But since 1945, we talked and spoke about democracy in the world, but we also had a program of exporting American culture. As I said, jazz went out on Voice of America. Abstract expressionism in the 1950s, there were international exhibitions organized. Hollywood was a big part of how people identified us. You know, we were identified with a certain kind of culture that was connected to ideas about freedom, about free expression, also about prosperity. We were identified as prosperous. What identifies us now, the social media platforms that are now, I mean, it's on everybody's phone everywhere on the planet, except of course in the countries where it's forbidden. And that form of connection is now what people think of when they think about us. And of course, it's not really about freedom; it's about manipulation. So, what is social media? It's a place where you might feel you can say whatever you want, but who gets to read it and who has access to it is determined by a set of algorithms that are designed by tech oligarchs, basically. And not everybody understands that or thinks about it or particularly cares, but that is now the thing that is shaping public conversations in so many parts of the world. And so that the perception that America is connected to manipulation, that it's connected to corruption, and now that it's connected to a certain kind of bombastic, ugly, vulgar politics has been for a lot of our allies who still had, maybe idealistic ideas of what the United States stood for, has come as a real shock. I've actually just come back from Europe. I was in Portugal for a few days, and I spoke to a lot of different kinds of Portuguese audiences and people while I was there. And for them, it's kind of the almost earth-shattering. The idea that the United States was maybe they didn't like us, or they didn't like our policy, or they didn't like what we do in the Middle East or what we do somewhere else. But they had an idea, nevertheless, that there was this strong American political system, and whatever mistakes we made, we were run by people who honored that system, and that was something that they respected and imitated. Portugal is also actually a fairly recent democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It became a democracy not just after World War II, but a couple of decades later, and so they looked to us as a model for a long time. Even, as I said, even if they didn't admire anything, and now that's gone. And for Europe, it's really a sea change, not just in terms of security. Of course, security very important, but also in terms of how you think about economics. Who do you want to trade with? Where do you want to make big investments? Is it a good idea to make a big, if you're a big Portuguese company or a Danish company or a Swedish company, do you want to make a big investment in the United States where there's now a political risk that some disagreement between your prime minister and President Trump could have an impact on your company, where tariffs are so uneven and unpredictable that you can't make a business plan? I mean, all the assumptions about the United States as a source of stability and predictability are really out the window. I mean, maybe not forever, and maybe it's not maybe there's something to be recovered. And there's still deep links between America and Europe, just as there are between America and Japan or America and South Korea, links of business and friendship and family and culture and so on. But an element of anxiety and uncertainty is now there, and I think will be there for a long time.
So how does that fit into the authoritarian playbook then? Why is that in the interests of a would-be authoritarian like President Trump to create this kind of instability and feeling of inability to trust the United States? Wouldn't a leader who wants to exert power, and he certainly loves to be beloved, he says that many times, wouldn't he want to have the trust and admiration of European allies?
I mean, there are different people inside the administration who have different goals in Europe. And so I don't want to be overgeneral. I know there's actually some conflict over this. But there's a part of the administration who actually want to create a kind of MAGA revolution in Europe too. So they're fine with destabilizing Europe because they want to replace the current model of European politics with something that more resembles what they like. And they have different motives for this. Some of them, the tech companies are afraid of European regulation because the one power on the planet that is capable of regulating big American companies, if the United States doesn't want to do it, is Europe, the European Union. And so they have reasons why they would like the European Union to be weaker. Those are business reasons. Some have ideological reasons. And so there's a part of the administration that wants that. Trump himself, is hard to. It is a mistake to think that he has a clear strategy. I don't think he thinks strategically. He's not thinking, how will Europe feel about me in a year, or how will this affect American-European relations 5 years down the line? That isn't how his thought process works. He thinks more, the way he thinks is in any given situation, he wants to be the winner. So whether he's talking to President Zelensky, or whether he's talking to British Prime Minister, or whether he's talking to a journalist or anybody else, he wants to emerge from the meeting with the feeling that he won the conversation, and he focuses on those moments of winning. And so his idea about negotiating tariffs is not, we'll create a good business climate so that over the next 5 years, there will be a lot of mutual investment. His idea is, how do I use the tariffs to claim that I've squeezed the Europeans for some more money? Or how do I create a a declaration that I won this argument or I made them pay up or something like that. I mean, that's the way he thinks. And so I'm not sure that the idea that you just expressed, which is, doesn't he care about how he's perceived in Europe? I just don't think that's the question in his mind.
Mm-hmm. And there is a lack of patience there as well. So he wants things done fast. He wants it done now. As you just indicated, he cares about the immediate win. However, when you look at the other autocrats who are in your book, the leaders of Russia, the leaders of China, um, perhaps all of them, they seem to have a much more long-term view of things. They seem to be a lot more patient. They seem to be willing to lay the groundwork. Putin's been there for decades. Who knows how long he's going to be there. Netanyahu for decades. So how, contrast this sort of short-term, power grab here in the United States with these other autocrats.
So again, I don't put Trump in the same category as the dictators of Russia and China. He is still an elected president. He's still. At the moment, Congress is not putting up any obstacles to what he does, but in theory, it could. He's still beholden to courts and so on. And so I don't want to say that he's the same. He has, as I said, autocratic behaviors and interests and language, but that doesn't mean he is the same as they are. Certainly, if it comes to some kind of contest between America and China, at the moment, the kinds of damage that Trump is doing here to our ability to trade with China, to our science and research institutions, which compete directly with China over new technology, to, for example, the whole area of green technology, wind and solar, which China is moving ahead with so quickly, and we've now stopped being interested in, at least at the federal level. None of these things seem like they're going to be useful in competing with China in the long run. It's actually, there have been several big articles written recently about how the U.S. is creating a situation where it's going to lose some competitions with China. And it feels very much like, particularly by moving away from our Asian allies, we're creating a lot of openings for China. But again, it's a mistake to think that that's how Trump is thinking. He's not thinking about a long-term competition with China. He's thinking, how do I have a meeting with Xi that makes me look good?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, let's turn to Latin America. And the news lately has not been good for Venezuelans and Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro. The New York Times reported today that Trump has given the go-ahead for covert CIA action in Venezuela. Yesterday, the military fired off another missile and downing a boat, killing 6 people. The death toll now up to 27, I believe, in 5 attacks. There are 10,000 troops amassed in the general area. So do you think the United States will go to war with Venezuela, or at least try to exert some kind of regime change militarily without full-scale invasion?
So there's several different things to say. First of all, Venezuela is a very, very ugly dictatorship. It's actually an example of a country that was a democracy and whose democracy was deliberately undermined by its previous leader, Hugo Chavez, kind of institution by institution, courts, universities, media, and so on down the line. It has a very brave and creative opposition, which is right now led by the woman who's just won the Nobel Prize, Maria Corina Machado. I interviewed her at the end of last year and wrote about her recently. And they actually won an election at the end of last year. And they not only won it, the opposition won, and they proved they had won. They produced the tally papers that showed how voting had gone in different areas, and they showed that they'd won. And nevertheless, Maduro, who's now Chavez's successor, refused to leave power. And since the election and since those protests, there has been a really horrific repression in Venezuela. And I met just actually yesterday, I met several women who had been forced to flee. There are a lot of people in prison. The economy is terrible. I mean, the reason why Venezuelans have fled to Mexico and to Peru and to Colombia and to the United States is because Venezuela has become unlivable. So that's correct. It seems to me that the administration has mixed motives in wanting to intervene in Venezuela. Maybe there are some people who want to overthrow Maduro or put pressure on Maduro or use some kind of military action. I mean, I don't have a blueprint for what that's going to be, but clearly there's going to be something. Maybe they want to use that to put pressure on Maduro to persuade him finally to leave, or to persuade the army to abandon him. I mean, that seems to be the general plan. And I understand that's what the opposition thinks is going to happen as well. And maybe they want to do that to replace Maduro, to have a better leadership, to end that crisis. I mean, my fear is that through these, whatever kinetic action means, I mean, clearly the attacks on these boats, whoever was in the boats, whether they were fishermen or whether they were drug dealers, those are acts of extrajudicial killing. I mean, they were boats that were bombed from the air with no judgment or explanation. So there's no doubt that that is already a war crime. So the other question is why Trump is doing this from the domestic point of view. I mean, one of my fears is that the idea is to create a war, to create a war that's supposed to be a war on drugs and a war on crime, and then use that war to spread the use of, I don't know whether it's going to be ICE paramilitary troops or US troops inside the United States, or to use it as part of a narrative, we're fighting bad guys in Venezuela, now we need to fight them at home. This is my fear. I can't prove that's what's going to happen. So there could be different reasons why they want to do this. I mean, there is a good outcome, which is, Maduro could resign and we could have there is an alternative leadership in Venezuela that was democratically elected, and they could legitimately take his place, and then this could all be over. And then, of course, there's some much uglier outcomes, like, the military says, we're going to fight the Yankee imperialists, and, it all devolves and gets much uglier. So it's a very, well, if it happens, it's a very risky policy. I'll leave it at that.
And do you know if Machado is in any contact with the Trump administration?
Oh, I'm sure she is. But they have been, they were in contact with the Biden administration too. So it's not, that's not new. I mean, the Venezuelans, after the election, they sought international support to put pressure on Maduro. They got some from the US, they got some from their immediate neighbors, including from Brazil and Mexico, who have sort of leftist governments who were historically aligned with Chavez. So they have the opposition has a lot of international relations, and I have no doubt that they talk to the Trump administration all the time.
So is she ready to be part of a new administration? Should Maduro be toppled or leave? She wouldn't necessarily take over, but she might be one of the leaders.
So again, we have no idea what course of events there will be, and I can't predict it. And I don't know exactly what the United States plans to do either, if anything. There is, as you said in your question, there are these accumulations of American military force and ships and so on in the region. So it looks like that's what's going to happen. But to be clear, there was a president elected of Venezuela. It's not her, because she was banned from running. It's a former diplomat called Edmundo Gonzalez, who's right now in Spain. And he is the legitimate president of Venezuela. And so if Maduro were gone, yes, he could legitimately become the president because he won the election. So there is an alternative.
Yeah,
it's not. The idea is not that she would take over, but he is her in her party, and she's elected it.
But is he seen as sort of a figurehead, and she's the real power of the opposition?
I suppose that's right. Yeah.
And so, why did she dedicate the Nobel Prize to Trump?
For the same reason that the NATO Secretary of General is so effusive in his praise of Trump, and for the same reason that the British Prime Minister invited Trump to an elaborate state dinner with the king, because all kinds of people who want to be allies with the United States or who want something from the United States now understand that this is how you do diplomacy with the United States. I mean, and this is it's very ugly for Americans to watch. But this is, in the olden days, you would have a meeting at the White House, or you would talk to the Secretary of State, or you would talk to senior leaders in the Senate, and that would be how you would do diplomacy with America. And now the way you do diplomacy with America is doing something obsequious in the direction of Donald Trump. And this is in line with what I was saying a few minutes ago, because what he cares about is not the long-term relationship of America to Venezuela. What he cares about is being seen as the winner. And everybody knows that. I mean, it's not very hard to figure out.
Right. So it seems like he does have a strong interest in South America. So he just okayed 20
or someone
billion.
does, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, someone behind him does, you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so there is a kind of way of thinking inside that world, inside the MAGA world, that says we should withdraw from Europe and Asia, and we should focus only on the Western Hemisphere, and that's our homeland, and this is where we should focus our. And my guess is that the Venezuela policy is also, in addition to the other things I mentioned, is only partly a product of that way of thinking. And that way of thinking, by the way, I think is really dangerous, because American prosperity depends and has depended for many decades on our companies and our entrepreneurs having contacts in the wealthy world of Europe and in Asia. We have international companies that do business all around the world. They were able to do so because of the world, where there was a predictable set of laws and rules and trade regulations that everybody understood. And withdrawing from all that into some kind of 19th century vision where the United States doesn't leave, our half of the globe, I think is very small-minded, and it will also create an enormous reaction against us in Latin America.
He just okayed a $20 billion loan, I guess, or something for Argentina.
Yes.
He's looking to pressure Brazil to drop charges against Bolsonaro. So it does seem to be trying to exert a lot of influence on South America. And to this end of just having this control, this sphere of influence?
I think it's about having leaders in charge who are ideologically compatible. And so they see Milei is a little different from them. I mean, it's just nuances, but they see him as someone like them. And so the idea is we help him stay in power in order to preserve this kind of South American MAGA movement that we hope will spread. And then the idea is that, they will have sort of special relationships with those kinds of political parties in Latin America. And that will have, I don't know, I suppose it has political advantage to them and maybe economic advantages as well, not so much for the United States, but for the companies who they're close to and who they care about. And there are, I mean, I'm not an expert at all in people who do business in Argentina, but I understand there are big investors in the US who have interest in Argentina who are also in favor of this $20 billion loan. So the question is, was the loan made because it's in the interest of the United States of America to help the leader of Argentina? Or was it made because there are investors who are close to Trump or to others in the administration for whom it's financially advantageous? And I don't know the answer.
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above. Or all of the above. I mean, Brazil is also very interesting. So in Brazil, you had a leader, Bolsonaro, who lost an election, who staged a attempted coup, much like January the 6th in our country. And the coup failed, and the coup plotters were put in jail, and Bolsonaro himself left the country and is in disgrace, and also is in legal jeopardy. And there is a part of the Trump administration or MAGA world who also want to save him and bring him back. And again, this is partly ideological. It's because, he's also someone who tried to overthrow an election, and they want him to have legitimacy, and, then he would be back and he would have it would somehow bolster Trump's legitimacy as well. And so again, they're looking. It's not about what's important here. Isn't America's relationship with Brazil? Is it good for Americans? Is it good for Brazilians? Does it create trade opportunities and tourism opportunities for our two countries? It's about helping an ideological ally inside the Brazilian system come back to power.
So you mentioned that the outcome of this action in Venezuela could be to pave the way for more military action in United States cities. So I wanted to focus a little bit on that.
That's just my conjecture. I don't know that.
Yeah.
But as I said, they're building a narrative. And this is what they say when they send ICE into cities, and when they said they've been trying to send the National Guard to Chicago and and to other cities and to Portland. And when they do that, what they're arguing is that the level of crime and chaos is so bad in those cities that we need to send in essentially American soldiers to back up local police. And the difficulty that they're having legally is that the people who run those cities, the mayors and the governors of those states, don't want them, and have been saying very clearly, we don't want them here. This is not, there's no chaos here. I mean, this is why people are dressing up in frog costumes and, giraffe outfits, because they're trying to mock the idea that there are riots and chaos in Portland. In fact, what there is people dressed up as crocodiles or whatever they're doing. If you've seen those videos.
Yeah.
And my fear is that the Trump administration wants to continue to use this false narrative to say, we're in a global battle here against crime and terrorism and gangs from Venezuela, and therefore we need to bump up this this struggle here in the homeland. That's what I'm afraid of. It doesn't mean that it will happen.
Right. So as you look at what's been going on in American cities with masked men without warrants snatching people off streets here in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, elsewhere, and all of that chaos that has caused, and as you say, putting federal troops into cities, domestic troop involvement. What does that say to you as a student who has studied other autocracies, and I'm not saying we are in an autocracy, but other countries that have similar predilections. Does that look familiar to you? And if so, where does this script end? Or where does it go from here, I should say? No one knows exactly where it ends.
So the U.S. has very deep traditions and laws and kind of norms. I mean, and against the idea of using the American military against American citizens. And that's true in most countries or most democracies. The idea that soldiers would, who are trained, actually, what are our soldiers trained to do? They're trained to kill the enemies of the United States. They're not trained to be policemen. They're not trained to manage riots. That's not what you do when you're a soldier. And the idea of sending them into peaceful places and using them as some kind of crowd control it's almost an invitation to an accident. I mean, it's almost saying somebody will make a mistake, some gunshot will be fired. I mean, there are all kinds of ways. That's already happened. Exactly. And it's a you can see how it could go very wrong and be worse. And of course, this breaking of these kinds of norms and the use of militaries or paramilitaries against the population is, illegally and against the will of local leaders. This is very much an authoritarian practice, and it's actually well beyond what some of the declining democracies have done. I mean, it's almost as if they're trying to speed up this process by involving the military and by breaking those old American traditions. It's a reversal of what the military is supposed to be, and of course, it will undermine trust, in the military. And of course, it's designed in places like Los Angeles or Chicago or to create an atmosphere of fear and anxiety. It's meant to make people afraid, and that has, that could have all kinds of effects. Could make people afraid of voting next year. It could make people afraid of being engaged in politics. It could make people afraid to speak out or speak their mind in a way that was considered normal just a few months ago. So having armed soldiers in the street and men wearing military uniform, carrying military style weapons is, as I said, it's a clear provocation and clearly a violation of really many American traditions.
What about the masks? Have you seen that in other countries?
No, I mean, the masks is profoundly anti-American. I mean, our policemen wear little name badges, and in the United States, as do our soldiers. And this is for a reason. It's because our soldiers and our police are law-abiding, and they're what they do is supposed to be transparent. And again, it doesn't always work that way, and mistakes are made, and there have been plenty of corrupt policemen in our history and so on. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect, but the ideal, what people are trained to be, is transparent and law-abiding. And once you have people who are not wearing uniforms, who are wearing masks, who are driving civilian cars, and snatching people up off the street, then there is no way to monitor whether they're obeying the law. There's no way to know who they are. There's no way to hold them to account if they make a mistake, if they beat up a U.S. citizen, or indeed if they beat up an illegal immigrant. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to beat people up. Or if they violate the law in other ways, or as you say, if they kill somebody accidentally, we don't know who they are. And that's also extremely dangerous. And it's almost the opposite, exact opposite of the way we, for example, train the FBI, which is another federal force, it's a federal investigative bureau. And the FBI were always trained, and again, many mistakes were made there too, and many bad examples of FBI behavior, but they were taught that, they are supposed to obey the law. They are servants of the federal government. They are not servants of particular politicians. Their job is to uphold the Constitution and enforce the law, and they're trained along those lines. And they're trained to make whatever they do, as I say, transparent and available. And this ICE force, as it's now being created, is being trained in almost exactly the opposite way. So very much in the dark, untransparent, secretive. It goes profoundly against the traditions that we've had established over the last 100 years.
And the fact that ICE and the entire DHS apparatus has been the recipient of the largest influx of money of any law enforcement.
It is a huge, I read one statistic that they're now better funded than most armies on the planet, except for the top 2 or 3. So it's an enormous amount of money. And of course, it's been taken out of other things. It's why people are going to have higher healthcare insurance premiums. It's why there's going to be less money for schools and infrastructure. It's why they're destroying other government departments, even as they're building up this huge ICE paramilitary.
Yeah. So I guess the question being, this is a country based on the rule of law, and there have been hundreds of lawsuits pushing back against Trump's power grab in this instance and others, and to varying success. Lower courts in general are ruling against Trump, and specifically lately with regards to sending the National Guard into Chicago and into Portland. So how would you assess the power of the courts so far, 10 months in terms of curbing some of Trump's worst excesses?
So I'm not following the courts carefully, and so I can only give you my impression. But my impression is what you just stated, which is that there have been numerous examples of lower courts blocking illegal actions, blocking, for example, the illegal dissolution of government programs, which are supposed to be in the purview of Congress, blocking illegal actions against some of the people being snatched in the street. I mean, a lot of those lawsuits are just beginning. We're at the beginning of a long legal process for people who are going to be suing ICE and suing the federal government, and we'll see what happens down the road. My impression is that we don't know yet how the Supreme Court will rule on some of these bigger issues. And I am not enough of a student of the court or an expert on how their brains work to be able to tell you exactly what they'll do. But of course, what would be incredibly damaging would be for the court to exceed, to let Trump break the law, because that would then establish a precedent not just for him but for whoever follows him in the future. To establish the precedent, the president doesn't have to obey the law and doesn't have to do what Congress has authorized money to do.
Well, they did rule that he has broad immunity from prosecution. So.
Yes, I mean, that's about him personally. And that is also, of course, disastrous. And also that's very unusual. I mean, in many countries, there are presidents who've gone to jail. Actually, the French presidents have gone to jail. Brazilian presidents have gone to jail.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think, I mean, it's not that uncommon for people to send, to indict heads of state in other democracies. And so I don't know why in our democracy, the president would be completely exempt from any kind of legal responsibility.
Are there countries in Europe that you previously didn't worry about that now you do worry about that concern you in terms of a slide into authoritarianism?
I mean, really in every democracy now, there is at least one political party or movement, usually of the far right, but sometimes on the far left, which is seeking to challenge, which is seeking to challenge the political system or recreate it. And those parties rise and fall, and they have different, there are different moments when they do well or less well. I mean, at the moment, there is the larger European countries are run by people who who are still committed to not just to democracy, but committed to the European Union, committed to working together to push back the military and hybrid threat from Russia. So right now, Europe is actually fairly stable. I mean, there are, in France, there's instability because they have a parliament that is so split, it's not easy for them to choose a prime minister. And of course, that's not good. In almost every country, and you can point to some potential source of instability in the future. And of course, the question is, how do changes in the United States affect them? In some cases, I mean, this just happened in Canada. In some cases, there's almost been a reaction against Trumpist or MAGA-like candidates. That happened in the Canadian election. The electorate swung very hard in a different direction to elect someone who was of a clearly centrist liberal, small L liberal, meaning not meaning a classical liberal political leader, precisely because they didn't want Trump or Trumpism or whatever MAGA light version in Canada. But in other countries, there's a temptation to follow and imitate the United States, and we'll see.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in what's happening in the UK when you have Keir Starmer of the Labour Party in, and yet now he's deeply unpopular, and Nigel Farage seems poised to take over.
What's strange about the UK to me, and I lived for many years there, and I worked for a long time as a British journalist, so I know the UK pretty well. What's strange for me is that the UK is in a real funk. It's in very bad economic shape. There's a real sense of loss and depression, and this kind of poor economic performance. And of course, the reason for that is Brexit. And the reason is that the UK left the economic free trade zone that it was part of for many years. That cut off all kinds of companies. It had an impact on the educational system. It cut the UK off from all kinds of sources of funding and investment and so on. So the real source of their problems is Brexit. And this is why it's so bizarre to me that apparently the beneficiary of their discontent and dislike and unhappiness might be Nigel Farage, who, for those who don't know, was the politician who did the most to push the UK out of Europe, out of the EU rather, and to make Brexit happen. And so it's a very strange moment. It's as if the person who created your economic crisis and your national depression, you want him to somehow come to power.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really one of the problems is that the British have never really, I understand why the Labour Party doesn't want to go back into all that, because it was such a national drama and trauma for such a long time. But they are making a great mistake in not making sure that people know why they have the problems that they have and who was responsible for them. And I just don't think that's being very well explained.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you have nativism or when you have problems like that, it's easy to then latch onto someone who promises easy solutions in the form of nativism.
Well, easy solutions is the plague we all suffer from. Yet people who say I can fix it, or it just takes one person, or we just need to cut through the red tape and fire all the bureaucrats. I mean, those are solutions. Those are fake solutions, but they sound good, and many people will find them appealing.
Yeah, we have tons of questions. And so I know our time is running out, so I want to get to a few of them. Marcy, Neil, and Bruce, and others say, Anne says that Trump is not a strategic thinker or actor and has no long-term goals. But don't you agree that the folks who wrote Project 2025 are strategic and have goals, and that they are using Trump to implement those goals? It also seems that Stephen Miller and Russ Vought are also strategic, and they seem to have a lot of power.
Yes. Actually, I mean, we maybe moved on too fast. Of course, I think that people around him have long-term goals. Some of them are contradictory. Not everybody has the same goals, and there's, I can see some divisions inside the administration. But yeah, no, I mean, there are some people whose long-term goal is the creation of a Christian state. They don't like American secularism. There's some people who have a technocratic is the wrong word, rather tech-friendly vision of the US government, that the American federal government will somehow fund the tech industry or merge with it, or tech leaders will essentially become more politically powerful. So there's that kind of vision as well. There's some people who have a more racist vision. We just need to make the country more white. I mean, there are all kinds of people in the mix there. But yeah, I mean, they do have goals. And yes, they're trying to use Trump to further their goals, whatever they may be. I don't know that he's always a perfect vessel. I mean, sometimes he seems to do things they don't expect. For example, it was just my impression that when Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, brought the generals to Quantico to hear him speak, I think he was surprised that Trump also wanted to speak to them, and that wasn't part of the plan. And so you can see sometimes Trump disrupting what they want, and so I mean, it's true in all governments that there are different forces going on, but the particular nature of this president and the way in which he needs this constant stream of praise and effusive admiration and so on. I mean, everyone understands that, and that's and so whatever happens, it has to go in that direction. I mean, everybody feels they have to continually praise him and honor him no matter what happens.
Yeah. Do you think he looks at people like Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Kash Patel, Kennedy, all of them does he see that they're not really competent and for the jobs that they were asked to do? And that does not matter to him, that they kind of look the part and that's good enough?
I don't, I mean, it's very hard for me to know what he really thinks. So I don't know, I don't know how to answer the question. I mean, he either doesn't know or doesn't care.
Right. Okay. Steve asks, do you believe that civil war in America is a real threat, or are we in a cold civil war now? And if you think we are, do you think it will become a hot war?
So if you mean by civil war something like our previous civil war, where there are kind of big armies lining up at Gettysburg, I don't think so. No, I don't see how that will happen. The thing I'm more worried about is, and this you can see happening already. I'm more worried about the fracturing of the relationship between the states and the federal government. I mean, with Trump using federal funding, I mean, I don't know if you saw this story today, the cuts that are being made now under the guise of the shutdown are very heavily directed at Democratic states and Democratic cities. So cuts to federal funding for infrastructure projects or pollution projects and so on. And that raises the question, I mean, so if the president is using federal funding to punish people who don't vote for him, then why should people in those places pay federal taxes? And why should those states continue to send money to the federal government if they're not being treated equally with other states? And I've heard people begin to say this. It's hard for me I can't give you a roadmap for how that would break down, but you can see if the president is questioning the relationship between the federal government and the states, then maybe the states will begin to do the same. And that's actually the thing I've always been most worried about, that we have and then you begin to have a fraying of the country. I don't know that it would be as I said, Abraham Lincoln era civil war of the kind that we see in movies, but it could be a breakdown of all kinds of commercial and other relationships.
What about political violence? We've seen
political violence is already very high.
Yeah.
I mean, political violence is with us already. I mean, I don't know, people are talking about, are you worried about political violence? I mean, yes, because it's here. I mean, and there's different kinds of political, I mean, there have been the assassinations that we've seen of Charlie Kirk, of the Minnesota state legislator. There have been a few others. There's also the fear that a lot of people in public life feel, a lot of people in Congress, in the Senate, local politics. And I've heard about this in different places, that if they, and this is particularly true of Republicans actually, that if they, defy the president, that somebody will come after their families. The risk of being in public life has gone up. And I think everyone feels that. And that's, of course, also not good for democracy, because lots of good people who should be in public life and who should be part of the political process might want to, I don't know, maybe their family circumstances don't allow them to do something that is perceived as dangerous.
So, given everything that we've been discussing, given everything that's been happening in the last 10 months, do you think we are now in an autocracy?
No, and this is really important. So Americans still, we still live in one of the wealthiest, one of the freest countries in the planet. We have this incredibly rich society. We have access to all kinds of tools to express ourselves. We are not constrained by dictatorship. We can protest. We can, if we're lawyers, we can work on lawsuits. If we're doctors, we can work on public health communication. If we're teachers, we can help students understand the realities of American history. We have many possibilities and many ways to engage with politics or with public life or with the culture more broadly. And I don't want people to think that somehow we're now in a dictatorship and we have to stay home. I mean, I have spent time in real dictatorships and we aren't there yet. I mean, the reason I join programs like this and the reason I talk about it is I want people to be aware that we could end up there. It might take a while. We could end up there, but we don't have to. Because there is nothing that is predetermined about history. A lot of what Trump is doing is extremely unpopular. There are ways to push back against it. It's worth voting. It's worth being involved in politics. It's worth defying the sense of fear, joining with other people, and participating. And so we're not at the stage yet where we all have to move abroad or go into exile.
Yeah, what do you make of that when a lot of people are saying that now? I just hear this.
I mean, I can't, it's not for me to talk because I do live part of the time outside the United States and I have done for 30 years. So I can't judge people who want to live in Canada. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have
glass houses, that kind of thing.
I just can't, I can't be the judge of that. So.
Right. So, okay. So to sort of wind up on a positive note, there are these No Kings protests happening this weekend. And several people have asked, what effect, if any, do you think these demonstrations might have? And do you think that they are helpful, these public resistance demonstrations? Do you think they're productive? What do you think we can do to stop us from falling into the abyss of?
So I think they are helpful. And I lived in Poland over the last 10 years, and we also had a government elected in 2015 that carried out an assault on the judiciary. It's a long story. We don't have time for it now, but it was a way of just trying to dismantle the Polish equivalent of the Supreme Court. And there were these big demonstrations, really big ones all over the country in favor of the courts. And my reflection on them was that, of course, they don't fix the problem. The problem is only fixed by voting in elections and by changing the people in charge. But they have a lot of good effects. They help people realize that they're not alone. They show people who are apathetic that other people care. They create connections between people. Groups form around creating the demonstration, and those have long effects that last and go on. They'll make you feel better. I mean, sometimes they're fun. I mean, I can't promise your particular No King's March in your particular part of the country will be, maybe it'll be raining, I don't know, but they have it. They make people feel positive, and that's also important. And they can also, as I said, they can change the atmosphere. I mean, around once it's clear that millions of people are against this, and that millions of people are willing to work together and all protest together on a single day, then that also shapes the way politicians, in Congress and elsewhere, understand things. I mean, so I can't say that you'll fix the problem by having a demonstration, but they have good side effects. Actually, the best example of this is in the weeks before the Berlin Wall fell. This is now going back in time. There were these huge demonstrations all over East Germany and Leipzig and Berlin and elsewhere. One of the reasons why there was actually a particular security guard who opened the gate and at the wall, one of the wall crossings, which is how the wall was breached. And people like him were affected by those demonstrations. So civil servants, people who have to make decisions, police, maybe even people people who are in ICE, they're also affected by what they see and what they see to be popular opinion. So I think it's important to demonstrate to them. And also, by the way, the attacks on them it's so completely classic, that they're all, I think, was it Mike Johnson who said it's going to be Hamas, it's going to be terrorists, it's going to be Antifa, it's going to be people who hate our country. When people show up and they're waving American flags and wearing leopard costumes, they won't look like Hamas. And that will also send a message that's important.
Yeah. Provided the people who get the message are tuning into that, because our media.
It depends. I mean, if they're big enough, it'll be hard to miss.
Mm-hmm. So I guess there is this idea, this fear that there could be some provocation on the part of the authorities to justify sending in forces, and that it could, devolve into something that would justify the sending of, for police and or the military to calm the protests. And this kind of idea that Antifa is a group of people and it's an organization, a terrorist organization, when it's not. It's just an idea that could be used to justify an increase of military. So how should people behave and act at these demonstrations to prevent that from happening?
The demonstration should be peaceful and cheerful and friendly and morale building. And all the lessons from all kinds of civil protest from our country, actually, in the 1960s to Poland in the 1980s. All the lessons are that the impact of a peaceful demonstration is greater than the impact of something that becomes violent. So maybe there will be. It's hard for me to make a prediction, but the more if you're going to go, go with the attitude that I'm there to demonstrate that I'm a citizen and to exercise my right to protest, and I'm not there because I'm angry and I want to break things.
All right. Anne, it has been a pleasure, as always, to have you on the show. And I really love reading your work in The Atlantic and elsewhere. And, your books, of course, are wonderful. And thank you, and hope we see you again soon.
Thanks so much. I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you.
So thank you for joining us, and definitely stay tuned next week. We'll have Linda Greenhouse from the New York Times speaking with Pat Morrison. So stay tuned for that. And then I will be back with you at a later date, and have a great evening.